Chapter 1. Before the war. Mariupol smelled like the sea. Even in the courtyards between the high-rise buildings, you could sometimes feel the salty wind, which carried with it the smell of seaweed, rusty iron from the port cranes, and distant ships. For 10-year-old Artem, this smell was part of his childhood, as familiar as the taste of his mother's casserole or the clanging of tram wheels rumbling down Metallurgikeskia Street. Artem loved his morning walks with his grandfather to the sea. His grandfather often joked. "When you grow up, Temka, you'll be a captain. You'll transport coal to Turkey or fish to Greece." The boy laughed and replied, "I'd rather be a pirate. A real one, like in the movies." He dreamed of adventures. He had an old plastic toy sword, and he often imagined that their whole yard was an island and the sandbox was a pirate ship. His friends laughed, but they played with him. Summer, the sea, school, even boring math lessons, everything seemed eternal. Artem had a younger sister, Safika. She had just turned 5 and followed him around, repeating his every word. "My captain," she called him, and he found it terribly amusing. His mother scolded him. "Artem, don't tease your little sister." "I'm not teasing her, she follows me around," he would say in his defense. In the evenings, the whole family would gather in the kitchen. Dad would come home tired from the factory, but he always found the strength to sit down and ask, "So, Tyoma, what did you do today?" And the boy would start telling stories with an important look on his face, as if he were the hero of a novel.in that world. It was hard to believe that anything would change. The television sometimes talked about the news, about tensions, but it seemed distant, as if it were talking about some other country. Artem lived his life, full of games, laughter, the smell of his mother's baking, and his grandfather's stories about the sea. Chapter 2. The beginning of the disaster. Everything changed in the winter. First, there were the adults' anxious conversations. His mother began to call his grandmother more often, speaking in a low voice, sometimes crying. His father became gloomy and sat in front of the TV for long periods of time. Artem felt the tension, even though no one really explained anything to him. "Politics," his dad said once, but the boy didn't understand what that meant. It seemed to him that politics was something like a thunderstorm, loud, scary, but then it passes. But in February, it didn't pass. He was awakened at night by a terrible rumbling. The windows shook, and somewhere in the distance a car horn blared. Safika screamed. Mom grabbed the children and led them into the hallway. It was dark there, only the light from a cell phone flashlight illuminating pieces of wallpaper. "What is it?" Artem asked, trembling. "Everything will be fine, son," said his mother, but her voice was trembling too. It soon became clear that this was not just politics. The explosions became more frequent. People in the building began to gather in the basement. Artem went down there with his parents for the first time. It smelled of dampness, concrete, and fear. The basement quickly filled up, neighbors with children, elderly men, tired women. Someone brought mattresses, someone else brought jars of preserves. There was almost no light. Safika cried and clung to her brother the whole time. "You're my captain, right?" she whispered, and Artem felt he had to be strong. Every day, the situation got worse. The water disappeared from the taps, the electricity went out, and food began to be rationed. Sometimes his father and other men would go out, on reconnaissance, to get water or bread. They rarely returned, and when they did, they were always exhausted. Artem saw something new in the eyes of the adults, hopelessness. And that was scarier than the explosions. Once, when the roar of artillery was particularly close, Safika covered her ears with her hands and cried out, "Captain, save me." And Artem realized that he had no right to cry. He had no right to show fear. He hugged his sister and said, "We're on a ship. It's just a storm. We're staying on course." The words were childish, but at that moment they helped them both. Chapter 3. Siege and Destruction. The basement, which at first seemed like a temporary shelter, gradually became their home. There were no windows, no time, no day or night. There was only the rumble of explosions, which would subside and then grow again, like the breath of a monster. Artem stopped asking when it would all end. Every day was the same as the last, short trips for water, searching for firewood, rare meals, a piece of bread or a spoonful of porridge cooked on a fire made from broken boards. Sophia was losing weight and was often ill. Her cheeks became sunken, her eyes huge, as if her whole face had disappeared, leaving only her gaze. She still called Artem captain, and this word caused him double pain, pride and helplessness. Sometimes Dad would go into town for provisions. He would return tired, dirty, empty-handed or with some small item, a bottle of water, a piece of bread, a can of food. One day he didn't come back. A day passed, then another. Mom sat by the wall, clutching Dad's jacket in her hands. She was silent, and her silence was scarier than the explosions. Artem understood everything without words. But he told his sister something else. Dad went far away to look for food. He'll find it and come back. Sophia nodded and fell asleep with that hope. But at night, Artem bit his lips until they bled so he wouldn't cry. The city was slowly dying. Houses turned into black boxes without windows, streets into ruins. Charred cars, broken bricks, and rusty iron beams lay in the snow and mud. One day, Artem and his mother went to the well for water. They walked carefully among the ruins. The snow was dirty, and pieces of wire stuck out in places. A dog lay dead, covered in frost, on the corner of a house. Artem turned away, but it was too late, the smell of death had already burned itself into his memory. When they returned with heavy canisters, his mother could barely stand. She still tried to smile at the children, but her smile became empty, like a shadow. "We're holding on, really, we're holding on," she repeated, as if it were a mantra. Sometimes candles were lit in the basement. Adults whispered, children slept nearby. Adults talked about how the city was surrounded, how there would be no help. Artem listened, pretending to be asleep. Every word fell like a stone in his heart. But once, when the shelling was particularly heavy, the adults began to say prayers. Their voices trembled, but there was something common in them, as if all the pain of the city had gathered in one basement. Artem had never heard prayers before, but at that moment it seemed to him that these words were keeping the walls from falling. In March, it got even colder. The roofs of houses collapsed, the neighbor's apartment burned down, and smoke filled the courtyard. Artem saw an older boy in a burnt jacket sitting in the snow, holding something wrapped in a blanket. He didn't scream or cry, he just stared into space. Don't look. Chapter 4. Survival. Spring came to Mariupol without spring. The sky remained gray, the ground black with soot and dirt. Only rare patches of thawed snow reminded us that somewhere outside the city, life was still going on as usual, snow was melting, buds were blooming. But here, spring seemed foreign, as if nature itself had turned away. Mom began to talk more and more about leaving. In the basement, people whispered about evacuation, green corridors, and buses. But every time it turned out to be a trap, either there was shelling, or the buses didn't arrive, or people were turned back. "We can't stay here," Mom said one day, looking Artem in the eyes. "If we stay, we'll die." Artem nodded silently. The thought had been in his head for a long time, but hearing it from his mother was scary. He hugged Sofika tightly and whispered, "We'll make it. We'll get out." They didn't take long to get ready. All their belongings fit into 2 backpacks. A few clothes, some photographs, and a jar of honey that his mother treasured like a precious gem. Artem had a plastic sword in his pocket, a toy he used to play with in the yard. He couldn't leave it behind, even though he knew it was silly. They left at dawn. The city resembled the ruins of an ancient fortress, burnt-out houses, broken windows, piles of bricks in the streets. The silence was broken only by the occasional explosion of shells somewhere in the distance. They walked cautiously, darting from wall to wall. Mom held Safika's hand, and Artem walked beside them, trying to look brave. At the intersection, they met a woman with a boy about his age. The boy was carrying a rag doll in his hands. "Where are you going?" asked the woman. "Towards the center, they say they're gathering people there," replied his mother. "Can I come with you?" The woman's voice was hoarse, as if she hadn't had a drink in a long time. They walked together. For adults and 2 children. A small caravan of hope in an empty city. Along the way, they saw horrors that Artem would remember for a long time in his nightmares. Burnt-out buses. Smashed shop windows with nothing left but shards of glass. A cat darting among the rubble, as if looking for someone. On one of the streets, they came across a group of people gathered around a fire. They were cooking something in a large pot, and the smell of food was so strong that Artem felt dizzy. His mother approached them and asked, "Can we have some for the children?" One of the men silently poured a ladleful of thick liquid into a plastic cup. It was warm soup, bitter, over-salted, but for the children it was the best meal they had ever had. Artem shared his spoon with Safika, trying to give her more. The man looked at them and said, "Be careful further on. They often shoot there." These words sounded like a warning and a blessing at the same time. During the day, they hid in the basements of half-ruined houses, continuing their journey at night. For the fur. Chapter 5. A Glimmer of Hope. The wait dragged on for hours. People crowded around the wrecked bus, some arguing, some praying, some just sitting with empty eyes. Mom held Safika on her lap. Artem stood nearby, clutching a plastic saber in his hand, his only talisman. Finally, the soldier came out to the people again. "The buses will come. But not everyone will go. Only women and children. The men must stay." The crowd began to murmur. Some shouted, others began to argue. Artem saw a woman fall to her knees and beg to take her husband with her. The soldier turned away. Mom hugged the children tighter. Her face turned pale, but her voice remained firm. "We're going. We have to." Artyom suddenly realized, Dad would never have been on this bus. Even if he were alive, they would have left him behind. And this realization pierced him more painfully than the cold and hunger. The buses arrived in the evening. They were old, with broken windows and shabby interiors, but they still seemed like ships of salvation. People rushed inside, some crying, some shouting, but eventually the buses filled up. Their family was inside. Artem sat by the window, even though the glass was cracked and he could hardly see anything. Safika fell asleep in her mother's arms. The bus started moving. The ruins of their hometown flashed by outside the windows. Burnt houses, empty streets, shop signs where they used to buy ice cream. It was all disappearing, as if another life was being erased right before their eyes. Artem pressed his forehead against the glass and whispered, "Goodbye, my city." The journey was long and dangerous. Buses stopped at checkpoints, and people were searched. Sometimes it seemed that they would be turned back. But each time, the wheels started turning again, and the journey continued. In one village, the bus stopped for the night. The people were taken to the school gym. It was cold there, but safer than outside. Local residents brought bread and milk for the children. For Artem, it was a miracle. He couldn't remember the last time he had drunk milk. An elderly woman handed him an apple. It was red and shiny, like something out of a fairy tale. "Here, boy. You're the captain, right? A captain has to be strong." Artem took the apple and suddenly felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck. He just nodded and broke the apple in half, giving one half to his sister. The journey continued for several days. They rode, stood, rode again. The people on the buses became like one whole, they shared food, helped carry children, supported each other. Sometimes Artem overheard the adults talking. Some said that a new life awaited them ahead, that the main thing was to get out. Others had doubts, fearing the unknown. But for the boy, it didn't matter anymore. The main thing was that they were leaving the ghost town, and there was at least some chance ahead. Chapter 6. Epilogue, A New World. Spring outside the city was different. Here, the trees were really blooming, the grass was turning green, and children were running around the yard, laughing. But Artem couldn't get used to that laughter for a long time. He could still hear the roar of explosions and screams in his ears. They were settled in a small house on the outskirts. The house was old but sturdy. The neighbors helped, some brought bread, some brought clothes, some brought toys for Safika. The people here were warmer than the weather. But Artem often woke up at night. In the darkness, he imagined flashes of fire and grabbed his sister to check if she was still there. Only after making sure that Safika was sleeping peacefully could he close his eyes again. Mom got a job helping out at the local school. She changed, she became quieter, more serious, but always tried to smile at the children. Sometimes Artem saw her crying when she thought no one was watching. And he changed too. Now he didn't play pirates anymore. The toy sword was still in his backpack, but it was no longer a toy. It had become a symbol, a reminder that he was the captain and had kept his ship afloat. One day, a neighbor boy approached him in the yard with a ball. "Wanna play?" he asked simply. Artem was silent for a long time. He hadn't played ball since the war began. But suddenly he felt he could. He nodded, and soon he was running around the yard, catching passes, laughing with the other children. Laughing, for the first time in many months. His mother watched him from the window and smiled too. Sometimes at school, the teacher asked the children to write an essay, "My most vivid memory." Others wrote about holidays, trips, toys. Artem sat for a long time staring at a blank sheet of paper, and then wrote. "My most vivid memory is the night when I held my sister's hand and she said I was her captain. I was small, but I was steering the ship. We sailed through the storm, and we survived." The teacher read the essay silently. Then she came over and patted him on the head. Time passed. The scars in his soul remained, but life slowly returned. Artem learned to enjoy simple things again, the smell of bread, a sunny morning, his sister's laughter. Once, he went to the sea with his mother and Safika. Not to the old one in Mariupol, but to another one, a foreign one, but still real. The waves rolled toward the shore, the seagulls cried. Safika ran along the sand, collecting shells. Artem stood and looked at the sea. It was the same as the one in his city. The sea knew no war, knew no destruction. It lived its eternal life. His mother came up to him and said quietly, "See. Everything will be fine. The main thing is not to forget and to keep going." Artem nodded. He knew he would never forget. He would never forget his destroyed city, his basement, that long journey. But now he believed he had a future. He took his plastic sword out of his pocket again, raised it above his head, and said, "The ship is on course." Sophia laughed and shouted, "Captain, forward." And Artem felt that yes, there would be a new island ahead. A place where there would be sunshine, where they could laugh and build new dreams.